teach science content for those students. I also do a lot of the content courses for our science education minors, and I teach environmental science for our business majors. That's the required science content course for business majors at Concordia. A wide background. I've taught as young as 5th grade and as old as 12th grade physics at the non-university level. I've taught in public school. I've taught in a Catholic college. I've taught in a public junior college, community college. I actually even homeschooled our son for one semester, second half of second grade. His second grade class school experience, we had just moved to San Francisco, and it was a disaster. Don and I, my husband's sitting back up there in the corner, but we felt that for him to continue in the school situation he was in would be a terrible thing. 20 years ago, there wasn't the support for homeschooling, the network, so I felt that I was doing a rather radical thing, or at least if there was, I didn't know about it. And I felt I was doing a rather radical thing, pulling out of school for the second semester. But we agreed that that was the best thing, and we put it in a Lutheran school, our local Lutheran congregation for the 3rd grade on to 8th grade. So, jack of all trades, master of none. I'm not sure why Ed Feed asked me to give this presentation, except I am very interested in classical education, in Lutheran education, in science education. I love teaching teachers. I wouldn't trade my job here in Concordia for anything. I think I probably need to turn the lights off for you guys to be able to see this. I know if you want to take notes, it makes it a bit harder to see. But is that better, or is it better to have the lights on dim? Which is, you guys tell me. Is this better? Is this better? This is good? This is good? Okay, we'll go with this. So the topic is issues in science and Christian and classical and Christian education. And I think that this actually put the wrong thing here, so I need to go to the different one. Oh, that's my screensaver, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. I think that it's really important that we understand our own attitudes towards science. And in my years of teaching, I've come across a variety of different attitudes that students bring to college when they come. I've seen these same attitudes at the 5th grade through 12th grade level 2. Students pick up their attitudes from their teachers. So if we're approaching anything, we need to examine our own attitude. And I just put up here what the most common attitudes I've come across. They're not in any order, organized in any way, and I'm not trying to imply that these are the only attitudes people have towards science. A sense of uneasiness, anxiety, fear. I get this quite often among my students. I was never good in science. I'm scared of science. Even downright hostility. Why should I take this course? I'm going to be a kindergarten teacher. I'm going to be a business major. So this hostility. Ridicule and suspicion. Sometimes ridicule and suspicion actually grows out of an uneasiness or a hostility towards a subject. If you can't do it, you make fun of it. Okay, you don't understand it, it threatens you, then make fun of it. Some people actually go so far as identifying science as the enemy. Science is in conflict, they believe, with religion, or it's in conflict with ethics. Look what scientists do. They invent things like nuclear bombs. Maybe it's the social enemy. It can be a cultural enemy as they see it. The technological depersonalization of man, or the slaughter of the environment. And so people will have that identification of science to see it as an enemy. And some people are just simply indifferent. I don't care about science. I'm not interested in it. It doesn't affect me. I'll work the gadgets, and and that's all I need to know. Some are just perplexed and puzzled. They can't quite get it. They can't quite see it. It's always been, well, it's kind of interesting, and I watch things on the Discovery Channel, and I find it fascinating, but how do you really learn it? How do scientists really work? Maybe I'd like to learn more, but I need help. Then those of us who get caught by science, wonder, excitement, awe. I know I can't think of science or studying nature. I'm a biologist by training without just being overwhelmed by God's creation. The design, my husband and I just got back from a 10-day teacher exchange, a trip to Costa Rica. And we were in with a group, it was 12 teachers and a leader, but the majority were confirmed evolutionists. And they would be talking about the intricacy of the bat's echolocation and the fruit bats all have these bumps on their lips for smelling or for tasting the nectars, and the leaves on their nose for projecting their sound, and many other adaptations. I just happened to pull that one. Isn't it amazing how it evolved? And God and I would be often saying, isn't it wonderful that God created this and so designed it, and how can you ever think that it evolved by chance? And as kind of as an aside, I guess we got identified as the Christians, maybe for some t-shirts we wore or whatever. But on 3 separate occasions, other teachers in this seminar approached us privately and asked us, how do you reconcile evolution? How do you reconcile science with a Christian faith? And so I believe that knowledge of science in this day and age that we live in, it can become a critical witnessing tool. And I just couldn't believe that God provided this opportunity. Well, I can believe it. It happens frequently. But I was grateful that God provided this witnessing opportunity. However, some people go to the point of scientism. Science becomes their God. And science, or what science says, becomes more important than what God says or Scripture says. They begin to worship science. And they believe that the only truth there is that which science can prove. Or at least that which science can investigate. Because most working experimental scientists do not speak of proving anything. That's a misconception. So I do think that it's very important to examine your own attitude of science before you ever begin to teach science. This is a quote that I like quite a bit, and I think it explains what goes on. At the present time, our society attaches great value to the practical applications of science and relatively little to its ideas. Our civilization is often referred to as scientific, but that is only true of our gadgets and not of our ideas. So our students know how to use a microwave. They don't know what a microwave is. They know that rockets that man went to the moon, but they don't know how the moon stays in orbit around the Earth. And you could multiply this by many, many times. Another problem in our society is that knowledge is so fragmented. We become very specialized, it gets pigeonholed. The humanities students don't learn science, the science students don't learn the arts. In classical education, of course, it's very important that we produce students and that we approach all of these areas and that we have a multidisciplinary outlook. If you're teaching about electricity, don't just look at it as electricity, but then how are nerve impulses conducted in the body electrically? How do muscles contract? If you're teaching about light, you can talk about Isaac Newton. You can talk about the Greek ideas of how we see and what is light. You can talk about how the eye works. There's so many things. Now, besides the grammar of science, the facts of science, I think that every citizen should know more about science, how science operates, what its limitations are, what its presuppositions are. Not just the grammar, the individual facts within the subjects, but science as a whole. I think that's quite critical. Science education definitely influences society's attitudes. And our own culture, I think we do live very much like, I believe it was Dr. Reed said yesterday, in a pagan society, or maybe it was how Dr. Hines said it, that we are living in a society very close to that as an apostolic times. Science has become this god for some people. Scientism has taken over, and it's definitely influenced our society. But we have to realize that science influences culture and society, and in turn, science is influenced by the culture in which it finds itself. So, for example, the Mayan use of science was to time human sacrifices. It definitely had religious significance. Their astronomy was for that purpose. Our astronomy is for a different purpose. So we need to place science. And classically, how do we have to teach science in classical education? In its philosophical, historical, and social context. And I'm using philosophy here. I probably should have typed in also religious and cultural, but I think you get the idea of what I'm trying to say. In other words, we can't view it as just an isolated subject. I believe that contemporary science education, as it's taught in our public schools, is woefully inadequate for a number of reasons. I think some shortcomings in contemporary science education that a classical education would avoid or can avoid are the following. Typically, science is taught outside of any historical, theological, ethical, or philosophical context. I might be teaching my class about Louis Pasteur. He was working in the mid-1800s. And I'll say, I can move these. I can say, what was going on in the United States at the time Louis Pasteur was working? And I'll get blank stares. And it was the Civil War. So I think it's important that people can place these. Or we'll talk about ethics. Sometimes I show my class a movie on the testing of the atomic bombs or the hydrogen bombs on Bikini Atoll. And we'll talk about the ethics behind that. So science is important for everyone, particularly within a classical orientation. Because science is split and not taught classically comprehensively, the view often comes up that scientists are these technological geeks, that it's very narrow, that science says, that it's dogmatic, it's authoritarian. That's one of my pet peeves. I do not like it when I hear someone say, science says. Science doesn't have a voice. Science can't talk. A scientist may say, but there is no such thing as science speaking for itself. And now we move into logic, the logic area of classical education. What questions do scientists ask, and how do scientists answer them, and how does a scientifically educated person answer questions and ask questions? Often, science education is geared in our public schools only to educating future scientists. We each want to have our clones come after us in our chosen profession. But that's why I so much like teaching the education students here at Concordia. Everyone should know about science. And it becomes useful in all walks of life, what I try to say. Now, if those are some of the shortcomings, on the flip side, how should science be taught instead? Well, I think it's foundational, one of the foundational disciplines. If we take astronomy as one of the subjects of the quadrivium, astronomy actually can represent all empirical investigation, all science, so it is foundational in classical education. It should be taught as a broad enterprise. The creativity of working scientists is amazing. You cannot be successful in science if you aren't creative. Many scientists are very interested in the arts and in music as opposed to the non-scientist stereotype of what the scientist is like. It's also not authoritative or dogmatic if you have a good working scientist, because everything that has been discovered by past scientists is open to reinterpretation. We jettison those things that don't work out, and we should. Sometimes it takes 1,000, 2,000 years to do that. Think how long the Ptolemaic model of the solar system was the dominant paradigm. Currently, evolution is the dominant paradigm. Maybe for another 1,000 years, who knows? I'm confident that at some point it will be jettisoned. There are many cracks in evolutionary theory right now that we'll look at. But it's always subject to challenge. It is a liberal art. It is one of the liberal arts, and therefore definitely belongs in classical education. Here again, just kind of summarize, teachers' attitudes do influence the students' attitudes, or for you who are homeschooling, both teacher and parental attitudes. So you need to ask, what is your attitude towards science? What do you think science does? What relevance does science have in your life? So if you're teaching your children classically, you need to think through these answers for yourself. Very few of us, I know I didn't have a classical education, but we have to see where we are before we can interact with our children to help them with where they are. Now, scientists as well as philosophers do not agree on the definition of science, much less the contours of scientific reasoning or investigation. So I'm using the word scientist here to mean a person who's trained in one of what we call the hard sciences like geology, biology, chemistry, physics, as opposed to the soft sciences like psychology, sociology, anthropology, one of those. And I don't mean hard or soft in terms of getting grades in school. I mean hard is the typical empiric, investigational, concrete, the real world. That's what I mean, as opposed to more just the theoretical or the ideas. Generally speaking, scientists agree that science is both a body of knowledge and it's a process. It's a way of looking at the world. But I'm fond of saying that if you ask 50 horsemen a question about a horse, you'll probably get 60 different answers. Horses are my passion outside of science. If you ask 50 scientists for the definition of science, you'll probably get 50 different answers. Okay, so my goal here is to just give you a working definition, and of course this is not cast in stone and you can add or subtract. But in a nutshell, we can say that science is an orderly exploration of objects and events in the natural world or the physical world in order to develop explanations, see relationships, and make useful predictions. So again, you can see here the thought processes and how this endeavor ties in to a classical education. As a Christian, or as a Lutheran, I will say that science is a search for God's patterns in the natural world. One of my favorite scientists is Johannes Kepler. If you're homeschooling, or if you're in charge of the curriculum at a Christian school, Kepler he was a Lutheran. His life is a very interesting story. He took some courageous stands scientifically. He acts as a wonderful model for what scientists should do. He had to jettison his pet theory when the evidence, when the facts, when the data did not fit it. He kept trying to adjust the facts to fit, and they didn't. And only by a courageous dumping of the facts was he able to come up with Kepler's laws, which actually describe how the planets in our solar system actually move. Kepler's 3 laws. So this is a person that I would really recommend to you to use in your science teaching. You can use his approach to mathematics. His life was very influenced by the wars that were going on in his time. You can work him into history. You can work him into religion. Lived at the time that Galileo lived. He and Galileo were contemporaries. So there's a lot about Kepler. And he always said he sought to read the mind of God. That was his goal. That's what drove him. He saw God as the great geometer. Okay, content of scientific knowledge is very relevant to a classical education. Why do I say that? Well, I've said it's already a process and a body of knowledge. So right here we're in grammar. You've been hearing a lot about grammar, logic, and rhetoric. The skills and the vocabulary of science are excellent sources of grammar. I read somewhere that a person taking a science class may learn almost as many new vocabulary words in the course of a year as a foreign language student learns in the first year of a foreign language. And even words that you think you know what they mean, like energy, or work, or power, they have very precise meanings. The vocabulary in science is very precise. And they do not mean in scientific vocabulary what they mean in everyday vocabulary. So here your students will have to master the grammar of science. And some of that's just drill and rote and memory work. And it's what many of my college students react against. Laws, theories, and models. These all mean different things. I'll get to that in a minute. But here we're beginning to move into the logic of science. Asking questions of your students, having them think with the grammar, with the vocabulary, have them investigating the laws, theories, building models based on their mastery of the grammar. Now, if we move into rhetoric, making useful predictions, finding and discovering patterns that God established in the natural world. So you see within the content of scientific knowledge, it fits with the model of classical education quite well. Scientific language. I particularly want to say something about scientific language. Some people think if it's said in scientific terminology, it's better. And that's certainly not the case. C.S. Lewis in Christian Reflections is talking about scientific language. He writes 3 sentences. The first of these, it was very cold. He calls that ordinary language. What was the weather like in Costa Rica? It was very hot. Okay, what was it like when we were in Prudhoe Bay? It was very cold. I think this is a rather stiff way of saying this, but it's his example of scientific language. There were 13 degrees of frost. I think what he's trying to say is the temperature was 13 degrees centigrade, and of course there was frost, Fahrenheit and frost. Okay, Fahrenheit and frost. But he's using this as scientific language, an example of scientific language. But notice what those do to you. They just look kind of like leave you cold, right? It was cold, okay. There were 13 degrees of frost, okay, so what? Check this one out. Ah, bitter chill it was, the owl for all his feathers was a cold. The hare limped trembling through the frozen grass, and silent was the flock in woolly old, numb were the feet and fingers. And how does that describe cold? And looking at these 3 forms of language, think what you can do is integrating language and science classically. We've got poetic language here. If we compare, there were 13 degrees of frost. It's precise, it's quantitative, it's operationally very useful. We can make inferences. Tender plants like trees, animals will seek shelter. It's repeatable. Somebody else can go out with their thermometer. It's falsifiable. Oh, my thermometer says it's 15 degrees. Well, mine says it's 11. Mine says it's 25. You know, my thermometer must be really broken. But this is science. It conveys nothing about certain aspects, what it feels like. What about somebody, we worked with some Costa Rican children. We were the first Americans they had ever met. Well, it's 13 degrees of frost. What does that mean to a person from the tropics? Ordinary language is better in this situation. Your ears will burn, your toes will go numb. So again, science is not the end-all be-all. And so you teach the appropriate use of language. In other words, science is not a sacred cow. It's merely the work of people seeking to understand man, God, and creation. It cannot solve all of man's problems. On the other hand, it's not this horrible thing that's created all of man's problems. Human sin has come in. Okay, and no one can solve all of mankind's problems except Jesus. Okay, so it's definitely not worthy of the irrational worship. Now here's another myth that you should explore in classical education. A lot of people seem to think that scientists are always objective. Scientists are objective. They are not. Scientists are just as subjective as anyone else. I've had Don's frowning at me. We have the same sinful and fallen natures as all men, the same rational capacities as all men, the same greed, the same pride, the self-centeredness. these things will enter into a scientist's work. So how does the subjectivity of science manifest itself? What subjects we select? Do we even think it's worthy of our time? Well, I want to research better ways for abortion, but not on your life. Okay? Experimental design. We just had I was in a group where we were trying to measure biodiversity in the rainforest. And we had a disagreement on the experimental design. Several of us said that we should measure it this way, and another group of us said we should measure it that way, and we had some debate on what is the appropriate experimental design. So again, in classical education, don't just tell your students, here's a lab, do it. Get them involved in the experimental design. Again, now we're moving into logic and at a higher level rhetoric in your experimental design. Data interpretation. Once you get the data, what do you do with it? Evolutionists and creationists work with the same fossils. It's not different data. But how do you interpret it? Internal factors can affect the how scientists, the subjectivity of science. And I made a list of those. I didn't put them on the thing, but by internal factors, it may be a scientist's worldview will affect what he or she chooses or doesn't choose to do. A scientist tries to be, a good scientist tries to be aware of bias and subjectivity, but we can't ever eliminate it completely. We try to be critical of our identifying and try to be critical of our own assumptions because everybody makes certain assumptions. That's what I mean by internal factors affect the subjectivity of science. External factors can be something as mundane as job security. You're not going to get many grants from National Science Foundation if you say you're collecting data or you're examining fossils to support creation. Okay? So the economic reality, paradigms, peer influence. When you are the only one in an apartment who believes in certain things in a Christian worldview, your peer influence can affect what project. Well, maybe I really would like to research on this, but I'm going to stay over here where it's safe. No one likes to be ridiculed. So grants and publishing opportunities, that's another external factor that may influence your selection. Now here's some important terms that I think are often misunderstood. A lot of times I hear students say, well, a hypothesis is a guess. It's a wild guess, and then a hypothesis becomes a theory, and a theory becomes a law. Not so. That's not the way it works. Hypothesis is not a wild guess. Hypothesis is a possible explanation, but it's not a shot in the dark. It's been made with a good background in grammar. Scientists have to know the grammar of their subject, the facts. They make careful observations, and then they use logic and the process of logical thinking to arrive at a hypothesis. So it is not a guess at all. And you can't make hypotheses until you have a certain amount of grammar. Hypotheses are then the basis for setting up an experiment. The experiment will provide more data, more observations. If based on that information, that new data that's generated, you can begin to answer the question, why? You're moving towards theory development. And here we're moving into logic and rhetoric. Examples of theories, the germ theory of disease, the theory of evolution by means of natural selection. I sometimes tell my students, theory ends in a Y, and so does Y. Laws, on the other hand, will tend to answer the question, how? You see the parallel? Law ends in W, and so does how. And laws are very often expressed mathematically. Kepler's laws, Mendel's laws. So it's not this becomes this, which is what a lot of people think of it. A model, what's a model? A model is simply a representation. You can make a model of the solar system with gumdrops, okay? It doesn't explain why, and it doesn't explain how. It merely represents concepts so that students are better able to visualize it. And these all have their place in classical education. Some phenomenon cannot be represented by merely one model. An example of a model would be an atomic model. You have the Copernican model, the Ptolemaic model. The wave particle model of light would be an example of a model that cannot be represented by a phenomenon that can't be represented by a single model. So again, here, this is very good, challenging material for classical education. In science, what's a fact? It's merely a refutable observation. Data, a collection of facts. A singular is datum. One of the things that I always mess up on, and many people do, we say data is important. We should say data are important. And that's one of my husband's pet peeves. Now, inferences are important in science. That's to draw conclusions from what you already know. You know this, you infer that. There are 13 degrees of frost. You know that when it's that cold, tender plants may freeze. That's an example of an inference. So the drawing of inferences in science really plays well into classical education, getting students to think. I think a lot of times when we stress grammar, people think that we're stopping with grammar, and we're not. Unfortunately, Sherlock Holmes used the word deduction wrong. He should have said induction. Instead of saying, I deduce, dear Watson, he should have said, I induce. And so people get induction and deduction confused. In induction, you reason from the specific, the clues, the observations, to the general principle. And deduction reasons from the general to the specific. I know this general principle, therefore I can predict or deduce this particular thing might happen. Abduction, also known as adduction, is really how science works. And that's an interplay of observation, induction, hypothesis formation, deduction, and experimentation. I think you all know what an experiment is. We have to have carefully controlled conditions, testing one variable at a time. Is there a scientific method? No, a scientific method or the scientific method? No. It is in all the textbooks. Classically, when you teach about science, please don't teach a scientific method or the scientific method. I like to think of it as a scientific cycle. Scientists work by abduction. Many, many different approaches are used. There's no such thing as the scientific method. Here's my interpretation of a scientific cycle or process of abduction. You can enter this at any point. There's not just one point. Often what you see in a textbook is hypothesis. And this is where it's like all of a sudden there's this wild guess. I have a hypothesis. And but usually what will happen is you make some kind of observation. Okay? And from that observation, through the process of induction, and in order to have a good induction, you need to have mastered the grammar. And then scientists will say with a little bit of inspiration, or a little bit of genius, or a little bit of just good luck, you make a hypothesis. And then, through deduction, you give predictions to be tested by the experiment. If this is true, I can deduce these specifics. Test it by the experiment, you'll get new predictions, and so the cycle continues. Once you collect enough data, then a theory can spin off or a law can spin off. But I think this is not perfect at any means. This is a very brief presentation. But I think this is much more how, in my experience, much more how scientists, experimental scientists actually work. Scientific versus non-scientific thought. The differences aren't as big as a lot of people think. I think a lot of times people think that science is different because we're surrounded by all the lab equipment, scientific instruments, this and that. But keep in mind that experiments are only controlled sensory experiences, and instruments only allow us to extend our own human senses. Maybe we can see things that are smaller, or things that are further away. We can investigate things that happened in the past. but we still are using human senses. Serendipity, just this plain old good luck, the good fortune of finding things that you're not hunting for. This plays a tremendous role in science. This would be a very good thing in classical education to have your children investigate. So many scientific discoveries. Alexander Fleming and the discovery of penicillin. Henri Becquerel and the discovery of natural radioactivity. The way Pasteur discovered the rabies vaccine. These are just some that come to mind. So a whole unit on serendipity and how scientists really work would be an excellent classical education model. I like to say chance favors the prepared mind. Again, master the grammar, understand the logic. Now, with serendipity, you may be able to do something in the category of rhetoric. Experimental science is what most people usually think of as science. It's how most scientists actually earn their living with experimental science. It deals with regularities, present, things that can be investigated in the present. It's testable, falsifiable, reproducible. And as I say, this is what most scientists do. There's another branch, historical science. It deals with singularities, origin of life, origin of the solar system, origin of the universe, one-time events. Can't be repeated during the past. Often they are constructed, or they're involved with constructing mental or statistical models. It's not repeatable. It's not falsifiable. Actually, evolution and creation science both fall into this realm. From faith, we can say that creation is revealed to us. But looking at it as a scientist, it was a singularity, okay? It's not repeatable on human terms. So it falls into historical or observation science, not experimental or operational science. Science definitely has its limits. It's descriptive, not prescriptive. In other words, it describes things as they are, but it cannot tell us what things should be. Instead, we need something transcendent outside of science, such as Scripture, that tells us what things should be. And then that will inform our science. Not all areas are even suitable for scientific investigation. You cannot prove God scientifically. That's not the function or the place of science. Science cannot answer the grand why questions. Why is there something at all rather than nothing? So questions concerning transcendent relationships lie outside the realm of science. Science gives us no final answers. So it's important in the classical education, but it's certainly not everything. Proper realm of science, on the other hand, is the physical world that God created. Space, time, matter, energy, repeatable, measurable patterns. We're still investigating God's revelation, His general revelation, and we're learning more about our Creator. But we need to understand where science should function and where it cannot. 1 Corinthians 13:12. Now we see but a poor reflection as in a mirror darkly, then we shall see face to face. If we're looking for science, we're only looking in the mirror. We're seeing a poor reflection of things. And Romans 1:20 is another verse I like quite a bit. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. Science does not advance by proving things to 100% certainty. I will often hear laymen say that science proves this, or in the science fair, students are even taught to write, I proved my hypothesis, or I disproved my hypothesis. You can disprove something, you cannot prove anything scientifically. Science works with probabilities. The most probable explanation, the one that the evidence supports to the highest degree of certainty. But it is not provable. That is important in teaching science classically, that you get the right mindset, the right understanding. And this ties back to what I say. Citizens need to understand more about science and how science functions, what its limits are. Okay, so most probable explanations are sought, predictions are stated as probabilities. Progress can come from falsified hypotheses. We can discard that. We can reduce uncertainty as much as possible so that we get a higher and higher probability and get closer to a probable explanation. Now, the greater the complexity, the greater the uncertainty. This is why sometimes we look at physical sciences versus the biological sciences, and physical scientists, chemists, or physicists will be able to believe something scientifically with a much higher probability statistically than a biologist can, because we're dealing with such integrated systems where it's really impossible to isolate all of the variables sometimes. Scientific realism. This is not the same thing as naturalism. This is not the same thing as scientism. Scientific realism is very compatible with the Christian faith. It is very compatible with classical and Lutheran education. Scientific realism actually functions best within a Christian worldview. And this is why science developed in the Christian West to the degree it has. What does scientific realism say? Physical world exists apart from the observer. In other words, God created the physical world, He created us. So there is a physical reality that exists apart from us. We are not creating our own physical reality. It's not a figment of our imagination. We're not in the matrix, so to speak. The physical world is orderly. God's orderly nature, His logic, His care, His pattern is seen. We don't live in a random world where gravity works today and doesn't work tomorrow. Human senses are reliable. What does it say about the man's son asks for a fish, he'll give him a serpent, or a loaf of bread, he'll give him a stone? God made us with reliable physical senses. He's not a trickster God. The human mind, therefore, is capable of knowing reality. Christianity is the only faith that I know of that is grounded in historical reality, the historical reliability of the New Testament documents, the historical reality of Jesus Christ, resurrected from the dead, the empty tomb, the resurrection appearances. Okay? Fulfilled prophecy, miracle. So, reality is important, and the human mind is capable of knowing it. Science works in a rationally justifiable way because of these presuppositions. Science sequentially describes the physical world in true or approximately truer ways, and this goes back to the scientific cycle. Each turn of that wheel, we get a more probable explanation. Scientific realism and faith. Philosophy is presuppositional to science. And scientific realism is a good presuppositional philosophy. It's the one that working scientists take on. And as I said, it's very compatible with the way God made the world. Quantum physics raises some interesting ideas that you might want to explore with your more advanced students. However, this is a caution. Do not reformulate theology to harmonize with science. And that's always the danger. Positive aspects of scientific realism. It's the best account that we have for the progress and success of the scientific endeavor. And remember, all good gifts come from God, science included. It does a credible job of refuting anti-realism because it works with the real world. Realism is presuppositional to the scientific endeavor. The position of most philosophers and scientists who think that science and Christianity are compatible with scientific realism. The Liberal Art of Science is a publication that I found as I was trying to prepare this workshop. It's the title of an AAS report from 1990, American Association for the Advancement of Science. It was begun in response to these two 1986 reports. And I was very interested that a secular group would come up with the project they came up with, and I think it shows how, as Ed Beatz said yesterday in his opening remarks, that classical education is not just a hot topic for homeschoolers or for Lutherans or for Christians, but secular academies are also beginning to look at the value of a classical education. Carnegie Corporation invited AAS to organize a study of teacher education, those who are going to be science teachers. AAS then expanded the study to include the role of the natural science in the liberal arts curriculum for all students. So we're focusing here on liberal arts. And this is one of the significant study conclusions. Science is one of the liberal arts. Without the study of science and its relationships to other domains of knowledge, neither the intrinsic values of liberal education nor the practical benefits derived from it are likely to be attained. How is that for an interesting secular conclusion from the American Association for the Advancement of Science, relating science to the need for science education in classical education? You know, I don't think we could have said it any better. So you find strength at the fellows. Content of science is an ideal vehicle for classical education. It fosters open-minded inquiry. It offers opportunities for new creative discoveries. There's Galileo trying to talk about the Copernican model. It eliminates insularity, blind adherence to dogma, and by here I don't mean religious faith. Prejudices are unquestioning devotion to compulsive ideologies. Science also nourishes self-reflection. You see yourself as part of God's creation. You see yourself interacting with God's creation. It builds character, promotes responsible action, social action, particularly stewardship of creation. It fulfills the basic human need to understand the world and our relationship to it. This is a basic human need we all have. It requires learning and mastery of specific skills, both grammar and logic. It provides a conceptual framework in which to master objective, factual knowledge, which is very important in classical education. It's based on reason, rational approaches to problems, where we have our logic, part of the trivium. Requires articulate communication skills. Here is Archimedes trying to figure out the displacement of water, the Archimedes' law of buoyancy. I'm not sure he was so articulate. Legend has it that he saw the overflowing bathtub, saw the problem of the gold in the king's crown, and ran naked through the streets. Eureka, eureka. I don't know if that's legend or not, but I guess that would be an articulation communication skill. Again, once again, you see these historical figures that I've tried to show you, integration of science with social studies. Science values, builds on, extends the scientific achievements and knowledge of the past. Pythagoras, this is, I think, trying to show Pythagorean theorem here, has universal value and applications. Can't get more classical than that. Science is compatible with religious faith, or Christianity in particular. More compatible with the worldview of Christianity than any other faith. This is Isaac Newton, the famous apple story. Isaac Newton is for many, many, many of the foundational scientists, the great thinkers who laid the foundation for science, even here into the 21st century. Were devout Christians and were motivated. Their work was a motivation for God's truth and God's pattern. Yes?
How do Christian teachers help students deal with those teachings that are widely accepted in science that are incongruent with the teachings of the Bible? I'm thinking of old earth and evolution.
Okay, I'm getting to that. I think if we have enough time. This is why citizens must understand science. They need to make sound personal, civic, professional decisions. And this is from the AAS report. This is not Mary Korte saying this. This is taken from the AAS report. They need to understand science to participate optimally in the 21st century. Our leaders across various sectors need to understand, and I love this, leaders in government, education, and the private sector should understand science as a liberal art. Okay? Also, science avoids many pitfalls of postmodernism. Facts, laws, theories, they're not relative. Just as morals are not relative, these things are not relative. They're absolutes. Scientists collect data about real phenomena. Objective meaning is value in science. You can't create your own reality. Okay, so this is important. These are the conclusions. Our society is saturated with science and technology. You can't get away from it. We can't avoid science or technology. We don't dwell in a cave. We're not in Plato's cave. We should study science both broadly and in depth. It enlarges the mind, nourishes an aesthetic appreciation of the world. Classical liberal arts education held science in high regard. They had 7 liberal arts. You've seen this, the trivium of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, the quadrivium of mathematics, music, astronomy, and geometry. Subjects of the quadrivium: mathematics, geometry, music, and astronomy. They're all related to mathematics. They all teach reasoning. They all help develop the abstract thought that we're hoping classically educated students develop. Greek natural philosophy began with astronomy, one of the earliest forms of natural philosophy. Modern scientific revolution began with astronomy. And today, astronomy then is suggested in the quadrivium of all things. What happened after the trivium and the quadrivium? After the 7 liberal arts were mastered, then the sciences were studied: the natural sciences, the moral sciences, theological sciences, your religions today, and then one to study the professions: law, medicine, literature. Each subject had its own trivium. In science, it would be data accumulation for grammar, analysis and decision-making for logic, independent decision-making, and compelling creative communication and rhetoric. And here, both in logic and rhetoric, we put in experimental design. So, the grammar contents, your foundational facts, models, laws, theories, manipulative skills. Logic includes scientific methodologies, experimental design, reasoning, communication skills. Rhetoric is your creative and original research, new contributions to a larger body of knowledge or the extension of previous knowledge. So these are the science content areas identified in the liberal arts: nature of scientific understanding, scientific concepts that are integrated, and the context of science itself. So here you have this on your handout. It's just in kind of a chart form. Content of grammar or scientific understanding is its grammar. You need to know the vocabulary, the terminology, the mathematical concepts, the basic laboratory skills. So this is what I would begin the students with. Logic would be collecting and organizing classification of data and information, discovering laws, devising models, developing theories. I just want to take a brief minute to say something about this discovery method of science. You have to have your grammar before you move to the logic. Now that's not to say you shouldn't start hands-on manipulatives early, but you need the grammar. Classically, you need the grammar of science before you can do a good job with the logic and the rhetoric. That's in my opinion. For example, you don't teach a person to swim by throwing them in the water, right? You don't give a bunch of kids a football and say, go to invent football. You tell them the rules of the game. You teach them some of the skills. Other than that, you wouldn't have football. You can't just have students investigate something if they don't have a framework of grammar. And the rhetoric, it leads to values and ways of knowing. It shows the limits of scientific knowledge. Now, I put this in. This is not AAS, but I put it in here. Rhetoric also would include Christianity and science integration. How do we integrate the two? Scale and proportion are subjects you want to cover. Causality and consequences are subjects you want to cover. Dynamic equilibrium, homeostasis, and systems at all levels, whether we're talking about physical systems, earth systems, or living systems. Now, the AAS study had change and evolution. I changed that to read change and evolution versus intelligent design. And if we're talking about intelligent design, now we're going to bring in irreducible complexity and specified complexity. The gentleman's question about the age of the earth and evolution creation, this is where I would get it. Teach your students about intelligent design. Teach them what evolution says. Don't be afraid. We have to be able to confront those false theories. But intelligent design, particularly irreducible complexity, you need every part. You can't get any simpler. The whole system has to be there for it to operate. It can't evolve piecemeal. Specified complexity means that it shows evidence of intelligent design, not just design. Grammar and logic, we would get into the historical development of science. You could build units on that, the intellectual context in which these developments were made, and the cultural context. Now again, I added everything with an asterisk on these things. I added in addition to the AAS study. So by cultural context, we would definitely have Christian. Dimensions of science then, the logic and rhetoric areas, ethical, political, economic, and social. Bring this into your science teaching classically. Don't just stop with your grammar. Theological and religious dimensions were actually mentioned by the AAAS study. I have added science and Christianity in particular because it is my contention that Christianity provides the best worldview for successful scientific enterprise. These are the goals for classical education in science. All educated people comprehend and apply this basic grammar. They understand ideas and concepts that integrate science with other liberal arts disciplines. They recognize that scientific endeavor both affects and is affected by society and culture. And these are things that liberally educated citizens should be able to do. Again, I added this one, but understand science broadly and in depth, use skills and methodology to investigate the natural world, and then apply them outside the realm of science and disciplines other than those of science. So the skills that you will develop through classical science teaching can be applied in other subject areas. And they can be applied in other venues than academia. And you can also apply it in relation to faith. Okay, so that's, I guess that's our time for here. Now, on the handout that